Alrighty, welcome in everyone to just another edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. I am your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is November 19th, a Wednesday around here, and we got a lot to talk about. We had some coaching news that came out a couple of days ago. James Franklin will be the new head coach of Virginia Tech. Excuse me. We'll get into that to start off things. We'll talk about Lane Kiffin. We'll give a little talk about Steve Sarkisian. He has just shut down those rumors, so we won't waste too much time there. But an interesting idea to talk about over there in Austin. Then we'll do a little bit of a reaction to the CFP rankings. A couple of things we got to talk about: the Miami versus Notre Dame battle. Why is Utah so high? A couple of different things that I'm looking at pretty closely. Then we got some big games to talk about. We have Oklahoma, Missouri, one that I feel like is being kind of overlooked this week. USC, Oregon, the main event of the weekend. Pittsburgh, Georgia Tech, BYU, Cincinnati. Going to be some great games this weekend. And then we got upset alerts all around the country. And I left some off this list that we will get you on Friday. I promise you that. Plenty of more games to talk about after today, but let's jump into this. And let's go ahead and get into the coaching carousel that has already been crazy. We have one answer. At the very least, we have one answer moving forward. James Franklin will be the new head coach of the Virginia Tech Hokies. Home run hire. I don't think there's any question about this one. This is a top 15 coach in the country. I really don't have a debate otherwise. I really don't think there is a debate otherwise. This is a top 15 head coach in the country, 128-60 in his career, won a ton of games over there at Vanderbilt, which if you were to do a comparative analysis, I think Virginia Tech might have a little bit more consistent buy-in, I should say. I think Vanderbilt is very much getting there very obviously, but I think they nailed this one. I don't think there's any question about that. I think they got the exact right person. Not only to get this team back to where they belong in a lot of respects at the national forefront as one of the top teams and programs in the ACC, but in terms of recruiting, his Rolodex of high school coaches doesn't change that much. The 5 mile radius, or 5 hour radius, not the 5 mile radius, the 5 hour radius that everyone talks about is such a massive thing in recruiting because obviously everyone is a national recruiter. Everyone is a recruiter that wants to get guys from California and then guys from Michigan and Florida and Texas and Alabama. Obviously, that is something that you want to do. The bulk of your roster is going to be made up of guys that are roughly around your area. James Franklin did an incredible job of that at Penn State. Now, was it quite to the level of an Ohio State or an Oregon? No. It doesn't have to be at Virginia Tech. It just has to be at the level of a Georgia Tech or a Pitt, those teams, and he can compete with those teams. There's no doubt about that. To add a little cherry on top, just for a little bit of fun, in 2026, his first year coaching, he will get James Madison, Old Dominion, and Virginia all in 2026. You have a chance to beat all the teams in your state and prove that you are the marquee program within that state once again. I think James Franklin is more than capable of doing that. The other part of this is he's pissed off. There's no doubt about that. I think there is no question that James Franklin is very upset about how his time at Penn State ended, whether he feels slighted, whether he feels it was unfair. It doesn't really matter. I'll talk about that here in a second. But at the end of the day, he is upset. He wants to be an elite head coach, and there were a lot of people saying he wouldn't take the Arkansas job or he wouldn't take an SEC job because he'd have to play really tough teams, and that's what he struggled with so aggressively throughout his career. This guy's a competitor. He wants to be elite, and he thinks that Virginia Tech is a place that he can do that. We'll talk about maybe the long term of that here in a second, but I do think what happened here is the Florida State job is what a lot of people were talking about. As we got closer to, I felt like there were a number of deadlines that Virginia Tech tried to put on him, and he said, I'll just wait a second. I'll wait a second to see what Florida State is going to do. I think Florida State winning that game against Virginia Tech this past weekend, it could keep Mike Norvella's job, especially with the craziness all around the sport, especially with the buyout that they'd have to pay. I wouldn't be surprised if Florida State didn't open. The other part of that is Virginia Tech probably got pretty tired of waiting. Let's just be totally honest. They probably did not want to wait too much longer, and they got their guy. James Franklin is a fantastic coach, and he walks into a conference for the taking. There is no team in that conference. There's no program in that conference that is quote-unquote taking over. You could argue Miami. In November, they find a way. So I wouldn't really worry about that too much. Obviously, you're going to have to compete with them in a number of different ways. But again, the seat at the top is absolutely wide open. Clemson has left it vacant, and no one has taken it. I think Georgia Tech's doing a great job under Brent Key. I think that's going to keep scaling. I think Virginia is an interesting one to watch as this kind of battle starts. But Overall, you can scale this thing very quickly. You are going to get elite fan buy-in, and you are going to get donor buy-in because of the reputation that precedes James Franklin. Let's just think about this for a second. This guy had averaged in a normal year, he would win 10 games and they would go to an elite bowl game, whether that was a New Year's Six bowl game or right on the outside of the playoff playing in the Pop-Tart Bowl or whatever you want it to be. At the end of the day, this guy was doing elite stuff. At Penn State, he was winning 10 games a year. It's exactly what Frank Beamer was doing at Virginia Tech. He is the best coach Virginia Tech has ever had. If that's what James Franklin does at Virginia Tech, he will be right up there with Frank Beamer. So he nailed it. Virginia Tech nailed it. I think it's a perfect fit for both parties. I do want to talk about the Penn State part of this here for a second because there's been a whole lot of people when this hire happened now saying, Penn State, you better be right. You better make sure you get your right guy. And you're absolutely right. They better make sure that they nail this hire. They better make sure that they move in the right direction for their program because there is a world where in 12 months or in 24 months, they're watching James Franklin coach Virginia Tech in a playoff from the couch. That is on the table. There's no doubt about that. The program needed a new voice. It was not the wrong decision to let him go. I know there are some people that disagree with me on that, and some people I very much respect that disagree with me on that. I believe Penn State needed a new voice, needed a new direction. I even believe that if the next Penn State head coach doesn't work out, it was still probably the right call to move on from James Franklin and to find a new path for this program. Whether or not that's entirely fair, it doesn't really matter. College football isn't fair, and a lot of these coaching searches are not fair. The other part of this is Penn State can't be very happy with where he ended up. Now, obviously, Penn State and Virginia Tech are recruiting from two different pools. Doesn't change that he's going to take a lot of the guys from your 2026 class over to Blacksburg with him. 17 guys decommitted from that class, and they don't have to go too far away from home to join him at Virginia Tech. He is going to be recruiting against whatever the new coach is up there at Penn State, at least sometimes. He's going to want to win those. It's going to be fascinating to watch those battles go kind of come to fruition. I talked about the recruiting footprint. It's not all that different. There's going to be quite a bit of an overlap between the players that Virginia Tech wants and the players that Penn State wants. Obviously, Penn State has a little bit of a leg up, but James Franklin's got plenty of ability to recruit those kids as well, and I think he's going to be set up for success. I think those 17 guys that decommitted, I don't think all of them will follow him to Blacksburg. I think a lot of them love him, and I think a lot of them want to be a part of a program that he is coaching. That'll be a fascinating thing to watch over the next couple of days, and really as the portal kind of opens, as everything really kind of takes shape, we'll watch what Virginia Tech does over the next little bit. I assume he'll be around the program but not coaching. It'll be an interesting situation. There's no doubt about that, but I don't look at this one and say, man, Penn State really should have kept him around. I think they made the right choice. I think they have a big hire to make, point blank period, because it's a very good coach that you just got rid of. Virginia Tech just got a fantastic coach. The one thing I do want to bring up in this conversation is how long-term is this one? Because this is something that Liam Blutman brought up on Unnecessary Roughness, top ball watcher in the world, one of the best college football personalities we got. But at the end of the day, he was talking about this. Is this a one-year stop-off rehab type assignment? Or is this somewhere that he wants to kind of build up just a little bit? I think it could go either way, if I'm being totally honest. I think it could go that he wants to be at Virginia Tech for 5 or 6 or 7 years, really build this thing up, do some incredible things like he did at Vanderbilt, and then see where the chips fall at the end of all that. The other side of that is if he wins 9 games next year, which it's a manageable schedule, it's a tougher schedule within the realm of the ACC, but it's overall a manageable schedule. If he wins 9 or 10 games and then that Florida State job comes open, and then, I don't know, a bigger job comes open, let's just keep it at that for the time being, there's a world where he jumps after 1 year. I tend to believe he is around there at least for the duration of his contract, which I believe is 4 or 5 years as of right now. It's a great hire, regardless of if you get him for 1 year or you get him for 5, because I think what he could do in 1 year could get you in a position where the next hire you make is that much better and you just keep the train rolling instead of having to build this thing up from the ground, which James Franklin's going to have to do just a little bit here. But let's be totally honest. Nailed the hire if you're Virginia Tech. Absolutely nailed it. I think Virginia Tech is one of those programs. I grew up a Georgia Tech fan, so a little bit of context here. Virginia Tech was the team when I was growing up. Virginia Tech and Clemson were the teams that were battling out in the ACC every single year. You had Tyrod Taylor, you had Mike Glennon, you had so many. Cam Chancellor, you had elite players rolling through that program consistently throughout that time. I think they're going to get back to that. Now, how quickly, that's all up for debate. We'll see what that looks like over the next little bit. The Florida State job becomes more interesting now. Does Mike Norvell stay? Do they still fire him and James Franklin just was sick of waiting? Was Virginia Tech sick of waiting and they were going to move on to a Bob Chesney type figure? Who knows? We'll see what happens with Florida State down the road, but if you're Virginia Tech, you got to be over the moon. If you're James Franklin, you got a lot of work to do and you are very happy to be doing it. I have to imagine. I think they both nailed it. I think it's going to be an awesome thing to watch in 2026. Now let's talk about the belle of the ball. Lane Kiffin sweepstakes is probably the perfect encapsulation of what college football is. We have guys in ghillie suits sitting in bushes in Baton Rouge filming flights land and take off, and we have family getting off the plane. We don't even know if it's Lane. People saying it's Lane in a disguise. I don't think Lane left Oxford, but who knows? Maybe he did. Now, this is something that I heard Josh Pate talking about when all of this was going on. And apparently this isn't all that uncommon. This was something that kind of caught me by surprise in a little bit just because I haven't been as tuned in to these coaching sources as I was younger than I am now. Apparently this is not out of the ordinary. It's quite public, and that's kind of the out of the ordinary part, and that's because you're Lane Kiffin. And that's because it's LSU, that's because it's Florida, that's because it's the SEC. That's the reality of the situation. Whenever a big-time SEC coach is on the move, especially within conference, you're going to have a fight. So what will he do? He visited both places. It sounds like both places are great. Oxford's a great place. What is he going to do at the end of this? I don't know. And I really don't think he does either. I think he thought he knew a couple of different times throughout this process, and I don't think he's fully made a decision. I think that's why you see a lot of the kind of confusion from Ole Miss in a lot of respects. I think Ole Miss fans and Ole Miss brass are getting impatient. Now, he pushed back on the whole idea that there's an ultimatum on him to decide before the Egg Bowl. I'll tell you right now, if I was the athletic director, Keith Carter, you'd be making a decision before the Egg Bowl, plain and simple. And if your decision was to move on to Florida or to LSU, you would not be coaching my team in the playoff. That's just the way it would roll. So we'll see what happens. I tend to believe a decision will be made before the Egg Bowl. I tend to believe it'll be made before the time we talk next week on Wednesday. So we'll see what happens. We'll see if he's coaching next Saturday for Ole Miss, or he's on his way to Gainesville to start recruiting, or he's on his way to Baton Rouge. I still have this weird gut feeling that it's going to be Florida. I don't know why. I go back and forth every single second on this. I think he's going to stay sometimes. I think he's going to go to Florida sometimes. I don't really buy into the whole LSU thing, but I do think that's a possibility. It sounds like Florida's now meeting with John Summerall, so a lot of things are happening very, very quickly around this. I do think we'll have an answer within a week. I really do think the next time that we sit down here on a Wednesday show, I'll have an answer for you. Frankly, I'll probably have the answer by the Monday show next week. So I think this is going to be wrapped up here pretty soon. I wouldn't bet on anything. If I was going to bet this, it'll be fascinating to watch how this unfolds. If he picks somewhere else, I don't think he's coaching the Egg Bowl. I don't think he's coaching in the playoff. And I don't know what happens with that roster. I like to think those guys will stick around, but in this day and age of college football, you never really know. I kind of hope he stays, if I'm being totally honest. I love the idea of Lane Kiffin being able to build up this incredible reputation at Ole Miss, become kind of the Steve Spurrier of Ole Miss, if you will, and become that guy that gets the statue out in front of the stadium. I don't know. I think there's two battles that he's fighting in his head. Does he want to be that guy? Does he want to be the hero, the king of his own castle? Or does he want to go off and become what I've said it before. I believe at Florida and LSU, he can become one of the top 10, top 5 head coaches in the history of college football. I truly do believe that. At Ole Miss, I think you can do incredible things. I tend to believe you will not be able to do the things to get you regarded to that level. We'll see how this develops. Obviously, there is quite a bit of things that will happen over the next 48 hours, 72 hours, and we'll find out what happens this weekend. I tend to believe an answer will come by Sunday. If it doesn't, then it gets really, really weird as they approach that Egg Bowl and definitely the playoff. And then we'll talk about this for half a second because I just got on Twitter right before the show. It doesn't sound like this is going to happen. Steve Sarkisian, there were a couple of rumors of him moving on to the NFL earlier in the season. Desmond Howard kind of brought it back to life this week with a cryptic Instagram post as he was taking out his trash. Just said, don't be surprised if they part ways. Here's the thing. He kind of had me for a second. If he had said Sarkisian's going to leave, then we would have had a conversation. The idea that Texas would part ways with the coach that is the best coach they've had since Mac Brown is outright insane, especially with the athletic director Chris Del Conte. He loves Steve Sarkisian. He made that hire. He's going to keep that guy as long as Steve Sarkisian wants to be there. Granted, this thing doesn't continue going down a hill. I don't tend to believe it won't. So I don't think Desmond Howard was making anything up. I do believe he heard something. He does live down in Miami, so maybe he heard something around the Dolphins and Quinn Ewers. I don't know. I think he's going to be there in 2026. He has reaffirmed that he's going to be there in 2026, and obviously many people under that saying, oh, that definitely means he's leaving. I think he is staying. One thing should be said, very rarely does something get brought up this consistently if it's not a thought of something that's going to happen in the future. I've said it a number of times, if Steve Sarkisian is to ever leave Texas, I believe that it will be for an NFL job. I believe that will happen at some point. I think he will have enough success at Texas to move on somewhere else. When that happens, how that happens is all up in the air. I don't think it'll be this offseason. When it does open, I can promise you, or if it does open, when it does open, however this unfolds, that's the best job on the market, period. Almost no matter what is on the market. There's only two coaches in my mind that wouldn't listen at the very least to this job, and it's Ryan Day and Kirby Smart. Obviously, the Arch Manning thing is kind of null and void if he's going to be back for 2026, but that would be a fascinating thing to watch. And then LSU would try to hire Steve Sarkisian immediately if Texas was dumb enough to let him go. It doesn't sound like any of that is happening. So thought I would bring it up briefly here, thought about talking about it, planned to talk about it, and then about 5 minutes before the show, he said that is not happening. So not going to worry about it too much. I think you're fine, Texas fans. I think you have your head coach for 2026. These NFL rumors are not going away is probably the bigger thing to say, and we'll figure out how that unfolds when it does and what it means for Texas moving forward. But for right now, you got your head coach, so don't worry about that. In Virginia Tech, you got your head coach as well, and it's a really good one. James Franklin is one of those guys that I don't want to say was a victim of his environment because he had plenty of chances to win big-time games, to become the guy that Penn State wanted him to be. There's no doubt about that. But he is now at a place where he is more well-equipped to do his job effectively and not at the end of the year have the harsh critics. That's a massive thing for a guy like that. It gives him a freedom and a comfortability that I think he can do incredible things with. And I think he will. He's a really, really good coach, and I think he's going to recruit that place incredibly well and get Virginia Tech back where I'd love to see it, at the very top of college football, with Lane Stadium being one of the best venues in college football as it is. So we'll talk about it all as it unfolds. Obviously going to be a crazy offseason up there, and we'll see what the staff looks like, what all of that looks like. Hopefully it doesn't bring the coordinators from Penn State. Beside the point for the time being. But let's take our first break, and when we come back, let's just do a quick recap of those CFP rankings that came out yesterday. Oklahoma jumps up in the rankings. Texas officially out of CFP contention. A couple of things we'll talk about right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all of the coaching chatter going on around the sport. There's plenty more to come. I can promise you that. We got one job filled. James Franklin will be the new head coach over there at Virginia Tech. I love the hire. I think everyone loves the hire. Does Lane Kiffin fill another one and then leave another one open over there in Oxford, or does he stay put, and then Florida and LSU are looking for new options? Sounds like Florida's meeting with John Summerall. We'll do this weekly because to kind of put a bow on that, there's going to be a lot going on. We'll talk about it weekly, and we will get into all of the updates that happen. There's going to be quite a few of them. But let's talk about the CFP rankings here for a second because they came out yesterday. I don't love them as much as I love the other ones, but let's go ahead and jump into this, and let's get into what were some interesting rankings. If I had to say so myself, it starts at the bottom. Well, actually, let's start with two things that I just have to get off my chest. Why does Tennessee and why does Missouri get to be ranked right now? They're good teams. I'm not necessarily saying they're bad teams. I think they're actually two very, very solid teams that have great things about them. What about their resume makes them better than some of the teams that are not ranked? What about their resume makes them better than JMU right this second? I don't really know. But at the end of the day, they're ranked at 20 and 22 respectively. I don't love it. They will not be in my rankings when they come out tomorrow. I can almost promise you that. JMU, Navy, North Texas, where are they? I get it. Look, it's a group of five conference. I get it. They're not as good a football team. Let's just be plain and simple about that. They played really good football this year. And yes, it hasn't been against the elite opponents that everyone else is playing in a lot of different conferences, but JMU playing great football with a lot of different moving parts around that football team. Navy has one of the best quarterbacks, one of the best playmakers in the entire country in Eli Heidenreich and Blake Horvath, obviously. North Texas, Drew Mestemaker in that offense is downright special, and they're leading the toughest conference in the entire G5, and the other team right below them is ranked. Tulane is the top G5 team when you have other teams within their conference that are above them in their conference. I get it. Tulane's a great team. They have two massive wins over Northwestern and Duke. They deserve respect for those. I'm not arguing that by any means. You also lost by 22 to UTSA a couple of weeks ago. So I feel like we're just not being genuine about what this G5 spot is supposed to be about. It's not supposed to be about just the team that schedules the hardest out of conference games and then gets to take a loss to a UTSA because they gained up enough real estate in this thing. I think it should be JMU. I really do. I think JMU has been the best group of five team thus far. I think they've played the cleanest football. I get it. Maybe they don't have the massive wins that Tulane has, but my eyes are telling me JMU is a better football team. I'd lean towards JMU. I'm not mad that Tulane is in there. Tulane might be mad because the last couple of teams that have been in those CFP rankings have lost the following week. But at the end of the day, I'd lean towards JMU. I have a ton of respect for what John Summerall is doing. He's one of my favorite coaches in the country. But I just don't think they're the top G5 team right now. I would put them maybe third or maybe fourth in the G5 right now. But we'll leave that for the time being. Right now, we have Houston at 23. We talked about Missouri at 22 for some reason. Illinois sneaks back in at 21. Really good team there. You have Virginia at 19. Stays put. Michigan stays put. Texas all the way down to 17. I don't think that fully knocks them out. What I do think it does is everything has to go perfect. Literally everything has to go perfect for this Texas team to find their way in. They have to win out, which I don't feel confident in right now. They have to get Utah and Miami and Vanderbilt and USC and Georgia Tech all to lose another game. BYU probably as well. I think we can safely say Texas is probably out of the CFP conversation unless we have the two craziest weeks in college football, which are never fully off the table, are they? But let's get to the main event. We have Georgia Tech at 16, USC jumps up to 15, Vanderbilt down to 14, and Miami flips with them. The Miami-Notre Dame debate. Here's the thing. I think Notre Dame's a better team right now. When I release my rankings tomorrow, I will have Notre Dame ranked above Miami. Point blank period. I will tell you that right now. That is without question. I believe Notre Dame is the better football team. I believe they have proven that over the last 10 weeks. Here's the thing. If we get to a world where you have to decide between these two teams, now I tend to believe they'd find a way to bump both teams in there before they would leave one out in favor of the other, but let's just say you have to make a decision between Miami and Notre Dame for that playoff spot. If you put Notre Dame in, all out-of-conference schedules in college football will be ruined. I'm just telling you right now, there's no reason for a team like Miami or a team like Texas or a team like Georgia or a team like Oregon, any team in the country, to schedule these other tough opponents if you are not going to give them the respect they deserve for winning those games. I get it. It was CJ Carr's first game. I understand all of that. If we watch that game, Miami kind of rolled. They won. They ended up winning by 3. I get it. They controlled that game from start to finish. And the idea that we would not have Miami in the playoff, but we'd have Notre Dame slotted in there is absolutely ridiculous. And frankly, I think it's hurting everyone else in the ACC. I think it's putting everyone else in the ACC down because they're trying to bump up Miami as much as they possibly can to make this look not as egregious as it is, which it is. I'm not saying Miami has to be ranked over Notre Dame. I'm not saying that. I think the full body of work can tell you something differently, even with head-to-head baked in. I really do believe that. If there is a world where Notre Dame makes the playoff and Miami doesn't, it would be the biggest mistake the college football playoff has ever made and will ever make moving forward, because it would fundamentally change the regular season of college football. And it would fundamentally change the way that people look at the college football committee moving forward. It would cause a lot of problems. And frankly, we always talk about ESPN having too much say in what the CFP is. I don't know how true that is. What I am telling you, ESPN would lose money long term if this were to happen, because they would lose games like maybe an Ohio State Texas game next year, or Notre Dame plays a massive out-of-conference game against someone. I don't know who this would be. I'm just saying a lot of these would be on ESPN networks, and they would lose money. All I'm going to say on this is I get having Notre Dame ranked above Miami right now. I don't get it if we get to the end of the season and both of those teams, or neither of those teams, or just Miami is not in the CFP. It doesn't make sense. It just doesn't. So we'll see how this unfolds. Obviously, with Notre Dame at 9, with Miami at 13, I think it's fair to say it could happen. It would be a massive mistake, and it would cause all types of problems going forward for the CFP, for making it even harder to choose what the best 12 teams or the best 16 teams, or 24 was an idea I saw thrown out, which is ridiculous. But at the end of the day, I get the argument both ways. I understand why people think Notre Dame is better. I tend to believe Notre Dame is better right now. I understand why head-to-head has to matter, and if Miami is left out of the playoff and Notre Dame is in, we have a massive problem on our hands. Plain and simple. I'm not sure I get the Utah thing. There's no disrespect to the Utes. I think they're a great team. I think they deserve a lot of respect. I don't get why they're above Miami. I really don't. I don't fully understand what they've done, at least in terms of getting those big-time wins to jump over some of these teams. I think it's a team that could be in the mix, but at the end of the day, unless they get to the Big 12 championship, I wouldn't put Utah in the playoff. Maybe they can backdoor their way in, but at the end of the day, I wouldn't feel very confident that Miami or Vanderbilt or USC wouldn't jump them if they both win the next 2 games. We'll see what happens there. I just wouldn't have Utah at number 12 if it were me, and I think we're heading towards a 10-2 team being left out of the playoff. I think it could be Vanderbilt from the SEC. As crazy as that sounds, I think Diego Pavia could be sitting at home at the end of this thing, because that is very much on the table. A 10-2 Oregon, if they lose this weekend, is very much on the table as well. We'll talk about that game next segment. But overall, the Miami-Notre Dame thing is the main thing here. I don't love that Alabama is below Notre Dame. Don't fully understand that either. I think Notre Dame should be at 10. But again, hopefully it'll work out. If we have a bracket that includes Notre Dame and doesn't include Miami, and they have the same exact record, we have some problems on our hands when it comes to out-of-conference games, and it's going to get even harder to pick these top 12 teams. Real quickly, we'll roll through the bracket here. Ohio State, the 1 seed. Obviously, they are. Indiana at 2, no doubt about that. Texas A&M at 3. I think there was some conversation about Georgia maybe jumping them. I think the undefeated keeps them at number 3, and I'm more than fine with that. Georgia at number 4. Do they want to do this, especially if they don't make the SEC championship? Do they want to not play a game from when they play Georgia Tech on, I believe it would be November 29th, to when they play January 1st in those quarterfinal games? I can't imagine Kirby Smart is too keen on that idea. Obviously, you get the month to prep, you get the month to practice. It is a long time to not play a football game, and I don't think that would be ideal for Georgia at all. I think they should be kind of hoping for Texas Tech to jump them if they don't make it to the SEC championship. If they do, then wherever you place them, I think it's not a big deal. But that 4 seed, if you're not going to make the SEC title game, is a little bit off. And another example of why these mega conferences are downright ridiculous. But Texas Tech comes in at the 5 seed. They would face off against Tulane right now. Again, Tulane, that G5 team has lost, I believe, the last 2 weeks. Got to be careful this weekend. But Ole Miss would play Miami. Very interesting game. Again, why are we putting Miami in there? I get that they have a chance to get in as an at-large. They're not getting in as the ACC championship or champion. Why can't we just put Georgia Tech in there for the time being and then see if Miami can backdoor their way in? Just a weird cosmetic thing. Doesn't really matter at the end of the day, but it just think that's odd. But Oregon would play Alabama. I'd love to see it. There's no doubt about that. Bama being below Notre Dame, I talked about it. A little bit weird to me, but at the end of the day, Oklahoma will play Notre Dame. Just two defensive masterminds going at it. Would be incredible, incredible stuff to watch. This will not be the bracket at the end of it. I can almost promise you. There will be changes over the next couple of weeks because that's what college football is all about, but we'll talk about it as it unfolds. The Miami-Notre Dame thing is going to be very complicated. And by the time we get to the end of the season, if we have a conversation to be had between those two teams, they better pick Miami or it's going to get really, really messy in a hurry. But we'll talk about all of that as it unfolds. Obviously, we got some games to pick. We got 4 big games as I see it going into this weekend, and we cover every single conference in these games. So let's talk about it right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the CFP rankings. Couple of things that I don't necessarily love. Don't know why Utah's that high, but I feel like I've talked about that before. The Miami versus Notre Dame debate is one that will probably go till Selection Sunday, unless one of them takes care of it for ourselves, and tend to believe they're not going to. So it's going to be an interesting one on that Selection Sunday. If Miami doesn't get in, Notre Dame does, we got a problem. I'll tell you that. But let's go ahead and get into my Week 13 picks. We got 4 big games, as far as I'm concerned. 4 games that will totally change what the CFP looks like, or at the very least could change what the CFP looks like. And we'll start over there in Norman, Oklahoma. Number 22, Missouri, goes to number 8, Oklahoma. Oklahoma favored by 7.5, over-under at 42.5. This one's a noon kickoff. A weird dynamic coming into this game, because technically Beau Paribla could be available, but it sounds like Matt Zollers is going to start. I don't know what that means. I don't know if that's we could have Beau Paribla in packages. I don't know if that's we get down by 14, we'll put in Beau Paribla to try to lead us back. I don't know what that looks like. That's a very, very interesting thing and something that will be interesting to watch as we get closer to game day. Maybe Beau Paribla isn't even available for the game. It sounds like he very well could be. So we'll see how that develops. It sounds like it's going to be Matt Zollers at the start of the game. Maybe we see Paribla at some point throughout this one. But Oklahoma obviously coming off that massive win over Bama. I said in the breakdown when we talked about this one, the rest of this is not going to be easy for the Oklahoma Sooners. They forced 3 turnovers in that game and they won by 2 points. It's a very good team. It's a very, very aggressive defense. They are hard-nosed as can be. They have probably the best defensive line in the country, especially interior defensive line in the country. They are as mean as can be. It's not going to be perfect. Every single week, it is not going to be perfect, particularly on the offensive side of the ball, particularly in this game, as far as I'm concerned. When you have Zion Young and Damon Wilson on the other side, John Mateer is going to have a hard time changing this game with his legs, just in general. The same way I think he did against Texas. Now, the injury, I think, kept them from running him just a little bit in that game. Obviously not a foot injury, but still I do think kept them a little bit more nervous about that. Without his legs, this offense is a little bit anemic. They get a little bit lost, they get a little bit bogged down, and when you have those 2 edge defenders, it's just going to be really hard for him to find space. So Torrey Blaylock's going to have to be huge. Xavier Robertson's going to have to be huge. All of those guys are going to have to run the football, or it's going to be a long day at the office for that Oklahoma offense, as it has been in the past couple of weeks, and really for the majority of the year. I don't want to say the entire year, for the vast majority of the year. The fascinating thing to watch is Ahmad Hardy versus this Oklahoma run defense. Oklahoma's top 2 rush defense in basically every single category you can find in the entire country. Ahmad Hardy's a totally different beast. Can they contain him enough in this game? I think the interesting thing is, you look back to that Texas game that they played. Trey Wisner didn't have an elite day. He did enough, and he found enough openings in that Oklahoma run defense. Ahmad Hardy, if you give him one opening, could totally change this football game. So that is a very interesting thing to watch. You obviously, at least me personally, I tend to favor the elite run defense against the elite run offense, but it's up in the air pretty much every time that you face off. We'll see what Missouri has. I think it's going to be a fist fight. I think these 2 teams are going to get bogged down a little bit. I think the edge rushers on both sides make a massive impact, whether it's Taylor Wine or R. Mason Thomas for Oklahoma. it's just going to be two elite defensive lines going at it. That's what I really think. I think Oklahoma does enough. I don't think it's pretty. I don't think they necessarily love the offensive performance, but I think they win this one 24-18. I think they win another fist fight, and they get one step closer to that CFP berth with an LSU team that hasn't played well all season. I can almost promise you that one's not going to be easy and probably is going to be a slugfest as well. I just think that's the way Oklahoma's going to have to win games. I think they're more than comfortable with that. So I'll pick Oklahoma to win this one 24-18. I think it's going to be a really, really fun one over there in Norman. Number 15 USC at number 7 Oregon. The main event of the weekend. Oregon favored by 9.5 in this game. The over/under at 59.5. This one's going to be fun. There's no doubt about that. And they kind of profile relatively similarly. Both really good on the lines of scrimmage. Really solid run games from both teams. Maybe more options over there at Oregon, but plenty good options over there at USC. Explosive pass games, obviously, for both these teams. And two aggressive coaches. Lincoln Riley maybe not quite as aggressive as Dan Campbell can be from time to time, but Lincoln Riley can get plenty aggressive, can get plenty weird on the offensive side of the ball. There's two questions that have to be answered here. Has Oregon found their groove, and can they keep up with Makai Lemon and Jacoby Lane? Because that's really the only way. I don't want to say that. There are a number of ways that USC could find a way to win this football game, in my opinion, if they do not at least semi-slow down Makai Lemon and Jacoby Lane, they will not be able to win this one because Elijah Surratt, Omar Cooper kind of had their way with them against Indiana. They've only faced two top 50 pass offenses, Rutgers and Indiana. This personnel is going to be better than both those. I put Makai Lemon and Jacoby Lane right up there with Elijah Surratt and Omar Cooper, maybe even a little bit above. As crazy as that sounds, Makai Lemon is out of this world good. Oregon's the top pass defense in the country. How much of that is about the offenses they faced? How much of that is about them? We'll find out on Saturday because this is a very, very good pass offense with two of the very best wide receivers in the country. I talked about it when we broke down the USC Iowa game. I don't know why I was blank on that. The USC Iowa game. The fact that Jacoby Lane is a wide receiver 2 on a football team is outright insane. But if Oregon wins this one, I think we have it relatively decided in the Big Ten. It comes down to one game. It comes down to Michigan, Ohio State at the end of the year to decide, is it going to be 4 teams? Is it going to be 3 teams from the Big Ten? If USC wins, that's when things get interesting. That's when a 10-2 Oregon gets very nervous because your biggest win is going to be an Iowa team that could finish the season 7-5. That's still a very good Iowa team. I want to make that very clear. But at the end of the day, that's not going to move a lot of heads. And there's going to be a world where there's a lot of 10-2 teams right there. Do you outrank Miami? I'd bet you won't, as crazy as that sounds. I think that Notre Dame game will do plenty for Miami to put them above you at 10-2, and I think a number of other teams would do the exact same as well. So I think a 10-2 Oregon would be in a little bit of trouble. Obviously, they would get the benefit of being Oregon, and they would get the benefit of, I think a lot of people look at that and they say that's a very good football team. So I don't think it would hurt them terribly. I think it would put them on the bubble and make things a little bit uncomfortable down the stretch for this Oregon football team. I think it's going to be an awesome game. It's one in the preseason that we all look forward to and probably said, I really hope that's an awesome one. I really hope USC holds up their end of the bargain. I think we all felt pretty good about Oregon going into this year, but USC, we just hope they held up their end of the bargain. They have. And now we got an absolute battle up there in Eugene. I've gone back and forth here. I really do think USC has a shot to win this game. I think the Oregon run game has gotten so much better over the last couple of weeks. I think their younger defensive players are starting to get more confident. I think Oregon wins this game 34-23. I think it's a really fun one. They get up and down a little bit in the first half. I think Oregon has a very, very minor physicality advantage. I don't think it's massive. I don't think USC's physicality advantage would be a negative to many teams in the entire country. I think this is one where they have a slight advantage in that category. I think the run game with Noah Whittington will be the difference in this one, and Oregon will get a big-time win and officially send themselves to the CFP, probably, to make sure going into that last game against Washington. I'll take Oregon to win this one and knock USC out of the CFP. Still a very successful season for Lincoln Riley, but definitely a little bit left on the table here. Pitt at number 16, Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech favored by 2.5 in this game, over under at 62.5. A massive one in the ACC that pretty much will. I don't want to say that. could very well decide half of the ACC title. If Georgia Tech does win it, they will be in the ACC title. So it very well could decide half the ACC title if Georgia Tech ends up being the winner of this one. Regardless of the outcome in the Georgia game, they will end up being in Charlotte at the end of the year. On the other side, if Pitt was able to win this game, they go into a game against Miami that they got to win it to get in. I think Miami could knock them out. Miami could make the conference title, although it's very, very unlikely at this very moment. Georgia Tech could lose this game and make the title, but again, very unlikely. So pretty much whoever wins this game is in the driver's seat to probably join Virginia in that championship game over there in Charlotte. And it would be a weird one. There's no doubt about that. It would make a lot of people that want to exclude certain teams from the CFP a little bit upset, but two teams that have firmly earned it. There's no doubt about that. But Pitt comes into this one after a tough loss against Notre Dame. The good news is they didn't care, so they're all good over there. But they do come in with a top 10 rush defense. They struggled against Notre Dame. Imagine that. Jeremiah Love will do that to you. So I'm not super worried. That being said, this is a very, very talented team. This is a very comprehensive rush attack that can make things really, really tough, even on some elite run defenses. Even on Georgia last year, they made life a nightmare for all those guys up front the entire day. So that'll be something to watch. Haynes King will have to make plays with his arm. We've talked about that plenty. He is more than capable of doing that this year. The other part of this is this Georgia Tech pass defense is not good. They have gotten attacked by every single elite passer that they have faced the entirety of the year, including Dylan Lonergan last week. Mason Heinschel can do that. They have to get after this kid. That was the thing that Notre Dame kind of showed last weekend. Not necessarily an overly surprising thing for a young quarterback. You push that kid off his spot, he will give you the football. He's a very talented thrower of the football. He's still forcing it just a little bit. And I think that's something that Georgia Tech has not been able to get a ton of pressure. They might just have to force it. They might just have to send 6 guys. They might have to send 5 guys on just about every snap just to try to get a couple of those game-changing plays. Because I've talked about it quite a bit with this Georgia Tech football team. They don't need to be elite defensively. They need to be opportunistic. They need to find a way to get a couple of sacks, maybe a turnover per game, find a way to do a couple of things to give your offense 1 more possession, 2 more possessions in a football game. You're going to win a whole lot. I can promise you that. So I think this is going to be a really fun game. I think they go back and forth with kind of different approaches, but both have tons of success on the offensive side of the ball. This is just an outright feel game for me. This is not necessarily about X's and O's. This is not about any numbers on a page. This is about Haynes King playing his final game in Bobby Dodd Stadium on Saturday night. I don't know why. I don't know why that's the thing that keeps coming back to me. I think that guy is going to play till his arm falls off. I think he is going to play until they are up on that scoreboard and the clock hits 0. I think Georgia Tech will win a weird one here. I can't describe it. I think a guy like Haynes King is going to will that team to victory. I think the seniors on that team that have kind of built up what this new Georgia Tech is moving forward are going to will that team to victory. I don't know why. I really can't tell you exactly how it's going to go down. I really can't tell you how any Georgia Tech game is going to go down the rest of the way. Other than that, they're going to be close. I'm going to pick Georgia Tech to win this one 33-30. I think Haynes King has a massive moment in front of that crowd at night and kind of goes out as a hero around Georgia Tech football. Number 11, BYU on the road at Cincinnati, a game that lost a little bit of its luster this past weekend when Cincinnati lost to Arizona, but still a big-time game that can put BYU in a great position to rematch with that team that beat them a couple of weeks ago in Texas Tech and set themselves up okay for an at-large bid. It's really hard to know what an 11-2 BYU would be against a 10-2 Miami or a 10-2 Vanderbilt, but at the end of the day, would keep them in that conversation at the very least. There's no doubt about that. But here's the thing about this matchup. Both these teams are going to lean on the run. They both have very, very elite rush offenses, especially within the Big Ten. LJ Martin on one side is absolutely elite. Tawi Walker on the other, not too far off from him. Incredible running backs in this game. Cincinnati does have a little bit of an advantage in the pass game, no doubt about that. Neither defense is elite. BYU's is way more disruptive. BYU has the ability. They're 11th in the country in turnover margin per game. They're able to get homed at the quarterback a couple of different times per game. And Brendan Sorsby, he's played really good football throughout this year. these last couple of games, defensive lines have started to get after him just a little bit, and it's just one or two mistakes here or there. So both teams are likely looking at their last gasp for the Big 12 title. I think if BYU loses, it just gets too crowded. There's so many different teams. Cincinnati would have the tiebreaker over them. Texas Tech obviously would, and there's a number of other tie-ins and things that just make it very complicated overall, and it would be a very interesting thing to watch. But if Cincinnati were to lose to TCU to finish the season, then BYU could lose this game. Let's just be totally honest. One of these teams has to win this game if they want to make the Big 12 championship. I feel fairly confident in that stance. But Cincinnati had a chance to totally change the college football world here. If they were able to win this game and beat Arizona last week, then they would have been in a position to possibly be the at-large team from that conference. I think if they win this game now, especially with those two losses, it would probably lock the Big 12 into one bid. Now, could Utah sneak in as an at-large? I suppose. But if BYU loses after Utah, that being one of your losses, and you have Cincinnati play Texas Tech and Texas Tech rolls in the Big 12 championship, I don't know why you would put Utah in. Now, we'll see how that develops. Obviously, a lot to be done in this game, but I'll be totally honest. I feel pretty confident in BYU in this spot. I think they're going to be able to get after Brendan Sorsby just enough, force a couple of mistakes, and they'll be able to get this one done. 27-23 is what I landed on in this game. I think BYU gets a win. They continue marching forward to that Big 12 title, and then you just got to figure out if an at-large bid is on the table for this football team. I tend to believe it should be. Is a massive question, and I don't know the answer. They got to win this one before they get anything. So we'll see what happens there. I think they get the win, but I think it's a really fun one up there in Cincinnati. We got some great games. Obviously, it is the SEC deciding to take the week off type of week over here in week 13, so we are losing some big-time games, but there's plenty of great ones around, and we got to talk about some upsets that could happen this upcoming weekend. We got JMU, Michigan, Utah, Vanderbilt, Texas, all on upset alert, all in a little bit of danger, especially as the CFP kind of looms in their future. We'll talk about it all right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all of the big time games from this past weekend. We actually touched on every conference. We got Missouri, Oklahoma from the SEC. We got USC, Oregon from the Big 10, Pittsburgh, Georgia Tech from the ACC, and BYU, Cincinnati from the Big 12. And now it's time to talk about some upset alerts. They're all over the place, and I didn't include all of them here. We will have plenty more games to talk about on Friday just because there's a couple that are really, really important in their conference that we got to talk about. Louisville, SMU being one of them, a number of Group of 5 games that we got to get to. But for now, let's talk about some upset alerts that could happen. Let's start with Washington State at JMU. JMU favored by 13.5 in this one. I talked about it. JMU has been disrespected by the CFP committee, and now they get a chance to prove them wrong. They get a Washington State team in their building. And look, beating a Washington State team is not going to give you massive, massive respect in that committee room. Dominating them might just give you a little bit of respect. So let's see what happens here. Washington State, has been a weird kind of frisky team the entirety of the year. They're very flawed. They're all over the place pretty much the entirety of the year. The offense doesn't hit some weeks, then it goes for 40 points other weeks. The defense pretty much always struggles until they play Oregon State. So JMU walks in just absolutely needing this one, and I think you need to flex a little bit, and I really think you will. I don't think this offense from Washington State is all that elite. I love the approach that Bob Chesney has, and we'll talk about him probably in coaching searches here pretty soon, but love JMU here. A 4 out of 10, I think, is fair. I think there's just a weird enough spot to where Washington State could come in there and make something happen. I think JMU's a little bit pissed off, and I think they want to send a message. I think JMU wins this game. I'll put a 4 out of 10 just to make it a little bit more interesting over there in Harrisonburg. Number 18, Michigan, goes on the road to Maryland, favored by 13.5 as well in this one. This is a really interesting one because Michigan put together, weirdly enough, this is such a weird thing to say, and it gets so annoying when people say it, but I'm going to say it anyway. You take away the turnovers from last week for Michigan, it's the best offensive performance they had. They just made way too many mistakes. So the question is, can you dial those back just a little bit from your young players that made those mistakes, like Andrew Marsh and Bryce Underwood? We'll find out. The other part of this is Maryland has a quarterback that, look, Malik Washington is a young player. He's still learning. He's had up and down performances. Kids with that level of talent are always capable of the game where it's just on, where everything is just rolling. We saw it with JKS when he played Louisville a couple of weeks ago. It just worked. Everything was just going the way that he wanted it to. That can happen for a guy like Malik Washington. That can happen for a lot of elite quarterbacks around the country, or a lot just very talented quarterbacks around the country. The problem is the Maryland defense probably won't have much of an answer for Jordan Marshall in this game. They're 111th in rushing yards allowed per game. He's playing elite football, is Jordan Marshall. I don't think they're going to be able to slow him down. I think this one is interesting. I do think Michigan is able to get the win, but this is that college football spot where Michigan's been building up to the game for the last couple of weeks. They know they just have to win out to give them 60 minutes to see if they can go to a playoff. I think they can make it weird enough, can Maryland, but I'll say a 5 out of 10. I think Michigan wins this game. Would not be surprised at all if Maryland covered the spread. Kansas State goes on the road to number 12 Utah. Utah favored by 17.5 in this football game. You got to get it if you're Utah. Plain and simple. You don't win this game, and frankly, you don't win it pretty convincingly, I think you might be in a little bit of trouble with all those teams right behind you. And you have a Miami team behind you that gets a team like Pitt later in the season that could be a big time win by that point. But again, for this game, it's just dangerous enough. Utah's run defense has struggled really all year a number of ways. Avery Johnson can take advantage of that. This entire team can take advantage of that with Joe Jackson, with all the guys that they have. There's just one of those games where Kansas State has the ability to slow this thing down just a little bit, limit possessions, make one mistake from Utah be the difference maker in this game. I think Utah's going to win it. I really do. I think they have enough on the front to at least slow down Avery Johnson. I don't think they'll do great against the run in this game. I think they'll do enough, and I think they'll win. I'm going to say a 6 out of 10 because whenever a guy like Avery Johnson comes into this thing, it gets a little bit interesting, and Kansas State has been really fighting after a very poor start. But I'll say Utah with that home field advantage gets it done. I would expect Kansas State to cover that spread. Kentucky at number 14, Vanderbilt, 9.5 spread on this one. Maybe a little bit lower than some people would expect with this Kentucky football team, but they're ripping the ball around right now. Cutter Boley is a very dangerous player right now, kind of like what we just talked about with Malik Washington. That kid has this in him. It's just one of those days where everything is rolling. When the ball comes out of his hands, it feels very confident. It goes exactly where he wants it to. I don't know if it's going to happen in this game. It very well could happen in this game. But Vanderbilt comes in knowing you got to win out to have a shot, and your big one is next week. Kind of like that Michigan one we just talked about. Are they looking forward to that rivalry game against Tennessee just a little bit too early, and Kentucky can clip them? Because Mark Stoops has come very close to clipping a couple of teams this year. Hasn't quite gotten one. Now, rolled Florida. I should give him respect for that. But at the end of the day, hasn't quite gotten one of these big-time upsets that he is keen to get pretty much every year. They usually happen at Kroger Field, though. I'll put a 7 out of 10 on this one. I really do have a ton of respect for Cutter Boley. I think he is a dangerous player and can do some really dangerous things in this football game, but I tend to believe Vanderbilt finds a way to win this one and moves on to a Tennessee game that you got to win to get into the CFP. Number 24, Tulane, minus 7.5 at Temple. Just a weird spot. We talked about it earlier in the show. The last two teams that have been ranked in those CFP rankings from the group of 5 have gone on to lose the next week. You are playing a tough Casey Keeler team up there in Philly that has put together a good season. Not necessarily an elite season, but a season that they'd be very, very proud of, coming from where they were coming from. Stan Drayton did his best up there, but Casey Keeler is doing a fantastic job since coming up from Sam Houston State. Evan Simon of Temple is probably one of the more under-talked about quarterbacks. I think he'll be talked about quite a bit when we get to the draft cycle, but conversation for another day. Only one INT on the entirety of the year. He is not going to give Tulane extra possessions in this football game. They have to be efficient offensively, and that's always a dangerous task when you're on the road against a team that got nothing to lose. They want to win this game. They want to prove a message. They want to send a message to everyone that Temple, maybe not this year, but moving forward as a team you're going to have to worry about in the American. This would be a great chance to do it. Tulane's played with fire a couple of times. I like Evan Simon, Jay Ducker. Their running back is a very, very talented kid. I think it's an 8 out of 10. I think it's a very interesting spot. I think Tulane could lose this game. I don't expect them to, but it's a very dangerous spot against a Casey Keeler team that's still looking for that massive marquee win. I think they might get it this weekend. And then Arkansas goes to Austin this weekend. Number 17 Texas waiting for them. An 8.5-point spread on this game. It's obvious. Texas comes in limping after getting an absolute beating over there in Georgia. Now, I heard Cole Kublik talk about this, and it kind of clicked for me as well. I don't think they got physically beat as much as they had in the past couple of games against Georgia. They got out-schemed pretty badly. Bobby Petrino can scheme up some offense, and they have a quarterback that, if you haven't watched Taylor Green, I strongly advise you to do that. He is a really, really remarkable athlete. I would argue a top 5 athlete in the entire country, no matter the position that you're talking about. He is downright elite in so many different ways in this football game. The other side of the ball is far from that. Texas offense should be able to have a day against this Arkansas defense. Arch Manning has been playing really good football over the last month or so. I think he's going to be able to have a great game in this one. Now, 1 or 2 misses from the offensive line, 1 or 2 sacks, 1 sack where he doesn't see it coming and he fumbles, the game totally changes. So this is very much on the table. This is a 9 out of 10. There's no doubt about that. When you have an offense that's that dangerous, when you have a guy like Taylor Green that can do the things that he does, and a team like Arkansas that hasn't quite gotten that big-time upset this year, this is a dangerous spot. There's no doubt about that. No Anthony Hill Jr. as well for Texas in this football game. Broke his hand against Georgia. Very interesting game to watch. I think Texas wins as of right now. This is a 9 out of 10 on the upset meter. This is very, very real, and if the Longhorns don't win this one, they're staring a 7-5 season in the face, and then a lot of things change very quickly over there in Austin. But it's going to be a weird weekend. I can almost promise you that. If it goes straight forward, we almost have more chaos, and we almost have more conversation and more controversy and more anger to go around. But we'll break it all down as it unfolds. I promise you that. We'll be back on Friday to do a couple more games. Definitely didn't get to all the games that I wanted to on this one. We'll get to my best bets for the weekend. We'll talk about just where I think everyone sits in the CFP hierarchy, I'll call it, as of right now, moving forward, and a number of other things coming on Friday. Maybe we'll have a new coaching hire. I don't think we will, but we'll always keep our eye out on Oxford, Mississippi to see what happens down there. But thank you so much for tuning in. Please do like, subscribe, comment. It means the absolute world to me. Helps me out a ton. Want to continue building this thing for you guys. But please do like, subscribe, comment. And I'll be back on Friday to break down what I have to assume is going to be a busy couple hours in the world, or busy couple of days in the world of college football. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you guys on Friday.